The dirty little secret of private equity buyers is they have a playbook. But a private equity buyer is smart. Their playbook recognizes that we as business owners, we're not nearly as objective as we think we are. We make these emotional decisions about things. And if they come in and start talking trash about your company, 9 out of 10 business owners are going to say, to heck with you. You do not want to go exclusive fast. Why? Because you absolutely want a competitive process when you're selling your company.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Welcome to another edition of The Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel, and today I have a very important session to be sharing with you. In this episode, I want to talk about what's it actually like when you're working to negotiate with, to sell your company to a private equity buyer. Now, in the world, there's this trend. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the best buyer would have been your strategic buyer for your company, the person who might have been a supplier of yours who saw how well you produce for them and they wanted to absorb you, or it might have been somebody who was downstream of you, that was one of your customers bought you, or a competitor bought you, and those things still happen, and they happen frequently. But more and more companies in the $10 to $250 million range are getting sold each year, each decade, to private equity buyers. There's more and more billions of dollars being raised by private equity. And they're using this to do things like roll-ups and other parts. And they're playing multiples math. That makes sense. They can buy your company for an 8 times profit. And when they have their bigger scale, they can sell at 15 to 20 times profit on the exit side, forgetting the fact that they're going to get growth in there, at least according to their plans in addition to that. But they're going to make a lot of extra money even just on the multiple math itself. That said, private equity buyers are a different breed. And what's interesting is we've seen a lot of our business coaching clients who've actually sold to private equity buyers. And the dirty little secret of private equity buyers is they have a playbook. I have enough friends who are in this space that in many of these private equity companies, it's actually written down. They don't call it the dirty little playbook that they have, but they have a playbook of how they're buying your companies, how they're negotiating, how they're taking advantage of all the leverage they can in the negotiation to get the very best price and deal in the purchase of your company. And I want to touch on some of those here today. I was having a conversation with various clients this past year, year and a half, 2 years about these things. It's something that we went into greater depth about with at our Business Success Summit and some of the other advanced events, some of our advanced coaching clients we've talked with. I just want to share some of the most important parts of that with you here today. So this is going to be extremely important for you if you ever plan to sell your company and you're thinking that you'll be of a scale where the company buyer might very well be a private equity group. Generally speaking, you're going to be looking at a company that's over $10 million of value, which for many of the people who are participating in this podcast or coaching clients of ours, that's an easy threshold to hit. We've had clients who've sold their companies for over $100 million. When you look at the total sale price for that part, and quite commonly selling for 8 figures, under 100 but over 10, quite commonly. So private equity is a bigger player with that. So the first piece with this part is to recognize they do certain tactics over and over and over again. So let's just talk about a couple of the tactics that they're using. And I want to be careful here. I'm not putting a value judgment. I'm not saying that a private equity buyer is a bad person for doing these things or a company is out of line. I think it makes sense. Think about it this way. When you have a sales process in your company, you're selling your product or your service. Your salesperson, Joanne, she might, over the course of the year, give that sales presentation to 250 different prospective buyers, 1,000 prospective buyers, but let's say 250. The person buying your product or service might only buy it once or twice a year, or maybe even only once or twice ever. Who's got the advantage there in terms of if they're really skilled, who's got the advantage? Well, Joanne does, because if she's smart and if she's strategic and she's paying attention, she has all this repetition to perfect or certainly at least refine the process that she uses to go ahead and sell that. Private equity group, same thing. You as the owner of a small privately held company or a mid-sized privately held company, chances are you might have sold one company, two companies. I know one of the future guests we're going to be bringing on, Joe Brotherton. I was talking with him recently. He sold 4 of his separate companies for significant sales. He's got 2 more that eventually he will sell, and that's out of the norm. That'll be a total of 6 sales. But the people he's selling it to might have done 60 purchases in the prior 2 or 3 years. And that means they might have negotiated on 100, 200, or 300 potential deals in the last several years. Who has the advantage? Clearly, the private equity buyer does. And so that said, I want to arm you, forewarn you with what to look out for. So the first tactic that you're going to see, tactic number 1, and it happens in a strange way this way. We call this the high offer. You say, well, David, why in the world would a private equity group come in and give me, in a letter of intent, an unsolicited offer, oftentimes, a letter of intent that says, my company, which I think is probably fairly valued at $25 million, they come in and say, we're going to offer you $32 million. And you're like, ooh, you get a shot of dopamine. Someone thinks my business is worth $32 million. It feels so flattering, and the number is enough to really catch your attention. So why do they do that? Well, because when you look later on, what's going to happen is, as you go through that negotiating process, they're going to say, hey, here's why we're willing to pay that much. It's based on this assumption and this assumption and this assumption. Obviously, we don't know these things are true yet, but we'll find that out later. I'm giving you the non-pretty version, what is actually how they're going to state it. Now, when they come in with that high offer, they will flatter. They will tell you about how wonderful you've run the company, what an amazing business person you are. It's interesting. In many other types of negotiations, a buyer comes in and they do things to undercut the price or the value of what they're buying. Like, for example, over the years, I've worked with lots of people on deals where I've been selling real estate or purchasing real estate. And it's quite common that a real estate buyer comes in and says, well, I appreciate this here, but I'm looking at the roof here on this building, and gosh, that looks like it's got probably only 5 years of useful life left, and I can see that it's pretty dated on the facade of this building. It's going to have to be updated if we want to attract more tenants for this building. List goes on. But a private equity buyer is smart. Their playbook recognizes that we as business owners, we're not nearly as objective as we think we are. We make these emotional decisions about things. And if they come in and start talking trash about your company, 9 out of 10 business owners are going to say, to heck with you. But they won't use the word heck. They'll use another one that has to do with a tool that you kind of twist things with. That's what they'll say, blank you. So they come in flattering, they come in with a high offer, which is the ultimate flattering, and later on, though, they will chip away at that. Later on, the assumptions that they know probably are not true, when they discover that, lo and behold, they're not true, they come back and say, well, we thought X, so clearly we're going to have to make these adjustments. And that's an important one. So they use that to get momentum so that you have some momentum for the deal. And then the second thing that they do, and I'll put this out here as well, is they push very fast for exclusivity. And the reason they want exclusivity right there at the LOI stage is because they want to lock your vision in. They want you to have tunnel vision that you should only be talking with them, which is probably the single biggest early mistake that a seller of a company makes. You do not want to go exclusive fast. Why? Because you absolutely want a competitive process when you're selling your company. Now, at some point, you are going to have to go exclusive, right? A private equity company is not going to let this period of shopping their offer go on forever. But hear me on this. It is so important. Early on, do not go exclusive, because it locks your vision in. Forget the contractual piece of it. It functionally locks a seller's perspective in, and they don't think to go out and get competitive process. So this comes back and ties in with their first piece, which is the high offer. The high offer makes you feel like, oh, no one else would ever give me that. I should go exclusive with them. I'm going to tell you that almost always that initial high offer becomes lower and lower and lower. And at some point, it becomes so low that the deal itself is no longer nearly as good as it was originally. And maybe one that you, the seller, would not really want to take, but you now have momentum and sunk costs and this commitment fallacy that I've got so much engaged with it. Yeah, it's a big deal. So fast exclusivity. They're going to want it at the LOI stage. You don't want to do that. The best way of selling a company is you're going to go out and get multiple interested parties to come in with their initial offers to show their interest initially. You're going to qualify, sort through, and take your best people to the next stage in the mid-ground to get the very best price and terms you can. Along the way, they're going to be getting progressively more information from you, and you're going to be qualifying and getting progressively more information about them. Like they will be doing their due diligence along the way, you'll be doing your due diligence as well. And then only at the stage where you really have a clean, clear, well-screened buyer, you can go exclusive at that point. That'll be approximately at the purchase and sales agreement stage. Prior to that, you're going to keep talking with not everybody, but you'll have weaned through to the best of the categories. That competitive process is what allows you to make sure, number one, you do get a great deal, and number two, the great deal that you get is much more likely to actually stay great and close. So on your side, here's what it's going to sound like. They're just going to have it in the LOI that you're going to go exclusive. And my experience has been many sellers don't even question or challenge that. You're different, right? This is my coaching to you. When the private equity company puts that in there, you just simply cross out the exclusivity and say, yeah, I'm absolutely willing to have a conversation with you. And you also let them know, well, I can't sign the exclusivity. I'm already in conversations with some other potential buyers. You say, well, David, that's not accurate. Well, make it accurate. Somewhere in the next month or two, have a conversation with somebody about the sale of your company. I tease our coaching clients and say, hey, I want all of you to talk with me right now and say, David, I'm interested in getting your thoughts about possibly purchasing my company. And the moment they've done that, they are in conversations with another potential buyer for their company, right? So that's your first place. Now, if they push harder on that, now here's your second one. Let's say I'm talking to the private equity person. We'll call this person Paul. I would just say, Paul, you know what? Here's the thing. I would be open to going exclusive with you. Are you going to go exclusive with me? Paul's going to well, of course not. We're looking at buying multiple companies. I say, great, Paul. I don't believe in dating somebody exclusively who isn't exclusive with me. At least not at this stage. And I know I'm making a joke about this, Paul, but no, I'm not going to go exclusive just yet. Later on, when we're further down the road and I've had time to qualify you, I've had time to talk with some of the other potential people who are interested in the company, yeah, of course, at some point there will be an appropriate time to go exclusive, but it isn't now. You wouldn't go exclusive with me if roles were reversed at this stage. Too early. We're just meeting for coffee. We're just on a first date. I'm not going to go exclusive on a first date. We're not getting engaged just yet. You can make a joke of it. Now, private equity groups will put pressure back on you. Hey, then we have to go. We don't do competitive processes, David. We only go into situations where the seller wants to work with us. And that's BS. It's crap. They might say that, but 90% of them, of course, know that they might prefer to be exclusive at this early juncture, but that's not what it's going to be their last word on it. And if it is, that's probably not who you want to work with. So in addition to that, one of the other tactics that you'll see played out, which is, we call this trolling. And they're putting an offer, letter of intent to you, and they're gathering information. Remember how private equity companies work. Oftentimes they specialize in a particular niche in an industry. And so effectively, these are your competitors. And so going and getting great information about who your customers are and how you charge and what are your margins, and all these are valid information, things that they would need before they would purchase the company, but they don't need this information until much later in the process, after you've built some real momentum and after you've done enough qualification and checked them through to see if they are serious, legitimate buyers, and not until later on that you've made sure that you have a meeting of the minds, not just in a letter of intent, but in a purchase and sales agreements as part of the due diligence process. Prior to that, they're going to be getting information that's going to be only generically done in broad strokes. Further, you're going to want to make sure that even though many times you'll see in an LOI that it does not have proprietary information protections, confidentiality provisions, you're going to make sure that your attorney has approved what's in there, and you're going to make sure that you're going to have some non-solicitation provisions in there as well, that they're not going to go ahead and try to steal your customers or your staff or your suppliers, right? That's important for you, because I can tell you this, I've coached some of our clients who said, well, I'm thinking about buying, like one of our clients who runs a very successful, the largest type of construction company in his area, home improvement company in his state. He's the big guy. And he was thinking about going into another state. Actually, he was pointing his fingers to 2 different states. He was thinking about buying several smaller companies in these areas and using that as the base to start growing and taking what he's learned in his state and applying it to these 2 other states. And I talked with him. I said, well, what is it you really want to get from these other companies you're buying? And he said, well, I'm really looking for, I need somebody who's really good on managing the production side, who can hire out the different field crews that we're going to use. Many times we use subcontractors anyways, who can hire in the field supervisors who can make sure the quality and the project stay on pace. And I really need to have at least 1 anchor salesperson so we can kind of use that to launch in these areas. I said, okay, so you're thinking about buying and spending $2 or $3 million to buy 1 or 2 of these small companies as your base. Can't you just hire away for a lot less than that, these 2 key hires for each of these places? And that conversation led to what we call an alternative acquisition. Sometimes a buyer doesn't want to buy your whole company. They might just want to buy your best people, or they might want to buy your best customer. So beware a private equity group doing that to you. And the protections for you are twofold, or the 2 main defensive techniques. Number 1, not sharing certain information early in the process, making sure that you only do that later on when you really have a wise time to share. Number 2, non-solicitation provisions will give you some protections, although they're to some degree hard to enforce and really depends on how honest the other parties are, right? I mean, lay down with dogs, you're going to get up with fleas, regardless of the contract that says they promise not to share fleas with you. It's going to happen. All right, let's talk about 2 more of these here. Again, I'm wanting you to see that, and by the way, these things that I'm talking about, they happen over and over and over and over and over again. This high offer with the flattering, having it come down, happens all the time. This going for exclusivity fast happens all the time with a private equity buyer. This trolling for information and learning happens quite frequently. Most private equity groups aren't going to do that in a way trying to hurt you intentionally. They're not trying to steal your customers generally. However, they are trying to learn competitive information. Absolutely. That's one of the reasons they have such an advantage when they're buying, because they might have been you might be the 62nd purchase potentially of a company in your industry. They know a lot, and you're adding to their body of knowledge, which makes them a better buyer, in theory, a better operator as well. So the next one I will put on here from a technique standpoint that you see in their playbook is what I'll call deal fatigue. Deal fatigue. So they'll talk about, hey, we're going to do this fast. Hey, we have a deliberate process. Hey, this is something we'll move on in the early part. But what happens is they will stall things out. It happens very commonly. I can remember one of our clients we work with, she was selling her manufacturing business. The sale price was somewhere in the mid 10 figures, roughly around about plus or minus $50 million. So it was a significant sale. And the buyer for this particular company talked about, hey, we really want this, blah, blah, blah. And then they stalled her out. I mean, it was months that they slowed the process down. You say, well, why would they do that? Well, deal fatigue works really well in combination with other things. Like, for example, the deal fatigue that happens makes it much easier later on for them to extract concessions when they're pushing back about things like, well, we need to lower that initial price because X and Y, the assumptions it was based on, are not true. They ask for most of their heaviest concessions later in the process, and they're harnessing things like sunk cost fallacies, or they're tapping into your fear of losing out on the deal. They're tapping into the fact that now that you've emotionally pushed yourself to feel like you're going to be leaving the business, you've made some emotional separation from it, it's really hard to kind of put yourself as an owner back in to emotionally stay there. And they use that against you. And they use deal fatigue and get massive number of their major concessions in the 11th hour, right there toward the end. And again, that happens again and again and again and again. And I would love to tell you that it just happens coincidentally. It's not. This is a repeated tactic used by many private equity buyers. It is really, really common. And then I want to talk briefly here about some of the, actually I'll do one more here. And I think this is an important one. Yeah, let's do this one here, which is fear. They're going to harness fear. Ties in with the deal fatigue. And I'm going to hold off on sharing some of the other parts. Why? Because they harness fear. I'll talk about this. Fear of the deal falling through. And I'll talk about this in just one second. But I want to preface this. I was having a really, really good and substantive conversation with a good friend of mine, Kevin. Now, Kevin Bassett, he runs a CPA firm, and he's represented probably over 100 of his clients who have sold their companies to private equity groups. And he and I were having this conversation. And we were doing it with a small group. I think we had like 25 or 30 of our Business Success Summit returning graduates there for this private event in San Diego. And as we were having this conversation in front, he shared many different things. And one of the things he shared about, it's not on the board here, but his comment was, a lot of times a private equity group sells the dream of the sale of the company. And Kevin's comment was that he called it the 3Ds, that he's noticed and has seen with clients who've sold, and looking broader than that, that the 3Ds are, once this company is sold, that many sellers go through depression, divorce, and death. So depression, like now they don't have a sense of purpose. Once that company's gone. Divorce, the statistics for divorce shoot way up right after the liquidity event. Partly it's probably some spouses have been ignored, and then all of a sudden there's lots of money there that now they could make that jump and move to something else where before they might have felt financially beholden because the business wouldn't work without their other spouse and they were concerned about things. Or it could be that now their spouse is with them every day. And that's too much. They're used to him or her being gone during the workday. And in terms of death, this is a strange one, but statistically, you look at the death and mortality rates after a sale of a company, it happens, right? There's a loss of sense of purpose, a loss of engagement, a loss of feeling valued and esteemed from those things that can hurt that way. So this is not to say that you shouldn't sell your company, but we're going to be real about it and say it's not always this wonderful thing. So sell if you want to sell, but recognize that when they try to tap into fear of this deal falling through, keeping the company is not a bad thing. And this is the best defense you have, is to run the business all the way through the sale process as if you're going to retain owning it. Make it more valuable so that if they delay and play their deal fatigue tactic, what you can go back to them and saying, look, hey guys, the original EBITDA this was based off, the original profit this was based off of was a $4 million of profit. We're on pace this year. We're going to hit $4.5 million of profit. So if you really want to start pulling this stuff, we need to renegotiate the price because the company on that 10 times multiple we've been talking about is $5 million more valuable, or will be by the end of this year, right? You may or may not be saying that, but internally you're feeling that. So that at the end of that deal process, if it does fall through, you should be in a position where on your side you say, well, I learned a lot from it, and my company is now millions of dollars more valuable, and someone else will pay me the extra millions of dollars. It's a much stronger place to be in. And I can remember a client, and they owned a particular company in California. First sale fell through. The first sale was for just over 20-ish million. They ended up selling that company for twice as much roughly 2 years later. So it should be the case that you are building the business, and beware of when you emotionally separate yourself from the business, because that's how many owners have to do it. Otherwise, it's like their baby. How can I let go of this business? It's a strange process that goes on. Just don't let that work against you. Make sure that you don't have fear of the sale falling through. It should be that if this sale falls through, I'm going to go ahead and get more profit and more of a purchase price later on when I go ahead and sell it to somebody different than this. And that's an important one. All right. So I hope you picked up at least one or two good ideas here about selling your company. One of the things we've said with the Business Coach podcast is it's important that you don't just listen in passively or watch. It's important for you to think, how can I use? What's one or two concrete ideas that you can pull from this. So from my end, it might be, for example, if I'm coaching you, if I were your coach, it might very well be, most importantly, that make the commitment that you will never choose to do a sale process with only one buyer involved, that you're going to always make sure you have a competitive process. To do that, later on, you're probably going to use a sell-side advisor, whether the company's large enough that this person calls themselves an investment banker, or it's really small and they call themselves a business broker, or they just call themselves a sell advisor somewhere in the middle there. The name doesn't matter, the function's the same, right? They're going to be the one, if they're the right choice for you, they're going to run this competitive process for you to make sure that you have multiple different parties who are competing for your company. Maybe another coaching takeaway from you is you're never going to go exclusive. Maybe for you too early, or maybe for you, you're going to make sure that you are very strategic about what information you share and when, and what kind of contractual protections you have in place for the information that's being shared. Maybe for you, it's about making sure the company is more valuable so that if the deal does fall through, you don't have fear of it falling through. You actually have a twinge of excitement because you realize you're going to make more money down the road from reselling to somebody else for quite a bit more money. All right. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, please go back and listen to some of the past episodes. In addition, I'm going to be asking Kevin back. I think I have him scheduled in a couple months to come back, Ken Bassett, and we're going to probably get further into some of the financial games that private equity companies play when they're trying to lower that initial high offer by millions and millions of dollars, and how you defend yourself about that. We'll talk about working capital adjustments, and we'll talk about quality of earnings reports, et cetera, and some of those other pieces with that. But I just want to call your attention. So you might want to go back to some of the past episodes. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Please just hit the subscribe button, whether you're doing it on whatever audio-only platform or a video-based platform. Our goal each time is for you to leave with concrete ideas of not just what to do to be more successful as a business owner, but how to do the what to do. That's always been one of my great commitments to people that we work with, whether it's coaching clients or even you as the audience for the podcast. So thank you, and I wish you the very best. Bye-bye.